Hello everyone and welcome back to Amy's Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be going through all of the books I read in February. It's probably not going to be a very long video because I read 8 books. I was going to say only 8 books and then I realised that is a lot of books, but normally I aim for 10. But as you will see when I get into the books, I didn't finish book 1 until I think the 15th of February, and February is already a short month, so it was never going to be the biggest reading month ever for me. But yeah, we'll get into that in a minute. Overall it was a mixed month, I would say. No 5-star reads, I don't think. 1 4.5, but yeah, no outstanding 5-star loved it books. And some very disappointing ones as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the first book of the month was To Paradise by Hanya Yanagihara. Obviously, it is chunky. So this book comes in at 714 pages. So yeah, it took me a while. If you don't know, it's split into 3 books. The first book is set in the 1800s, 1893 in New York. The second one is in 1993, again in New York. And the third one is in 2093, you guessed it, in New York. So it spans 3 time periods, but is kind of centred and rooted in the same place. So, I love A Little Life. That will come as no surprise to anyone who's seen any of my content. It's a book I hold very close to my heart. And I've always been a bit dubious of reading other books by Hanya because I worry that they won't live up to A Little Life. I've not yet read The People in the Trees, and I've heard mixed things about that, so I'm not expecting to love it. But when this came out last year, a lot of people were raving about it. So I thought, okay, interesting. Hopefully I'll like it as much as A Little Life. I was waiting for it to come out in paperback because this is already a huge book. I didn't want it in hardback, and that's why it took me a year to read it after it had been published. So, the good things first. I really like the writing. I love her writing anyway. I know that. I like how she does just take a long time to describe things. Things generally seem very meandering. She gets really into the nitty-gritty of the human condition, of connections and relationships between people, and yeah, what it means to live on planet Earth and be alive and exist. What I didn't love about this book is that, frankly, it was 3 books in one, and I think she could have written those 3 books individually and they still would have held their own as individual books, if that makes sense. And I think cramming 3 into one kind of set them up to fail because they actually didn't go into as much detail as I wanted to. And in particular, what I really wanted was more connection between the 3. I think number 3 is where we get the most connection between them all, but the rest of them felt a little bit too separate for me. So I just didn't love it as like a collection together. And overall, I was just a bit underwhelmed. Like I said, I really liked the writing, I really liked the characters, I really liked what the book was trying to say, but overall I just didn't love the book. So I gave this 3 stars on Goodreads. It's probably more of a 3.5. But yeah, for a book that's over 700 pages, I wanted to love it more. Book number 2 is Somebody Loves You by Mona Ashi. So I went to a bookshop opening in London, a bookshop called Flock's Books last year, and heard Mona talk about this book, and that's where I got a copy of this. Now this is, it's like poetry prose, so not completely prose like we're used to in a conventional novel, but not quite poetry either. And it's about a girl called Ruby, and just about her growing up, her family, what it's like to be her. It felt somewhat semi-autobiographical. I don't know if it's supposed to, but overall I just didn't really connect with it, probably because it was this poetry style. And so I felt it was on the cusp of breaking into really interesting themes and topics, but because it was poetry or poetry prose, it just didn't really get deep enough into them for me. And this is quite a short book. It is 163 pages, so yeah, it's well under 200 pages, and so it just didn't really get deep enough for me to really connect with any of the characters or care about what was going on. And overall I just didn't really feel connected to the book or the narrative or what the book was trying to achieve. So underwhelming for me. Again, this one was 3 stars. Next up is a fur love story by Lone Lee. I wanted to read romance this month because it was Valentine's Day and I do love romance and I don't read enough of it considering how much I love it. And I heard people rave about this and I saw it in Waterstones, so I picked it up. So this is about two rival fur restaurants in, I think, California? Oh my god, I've already forgotten. Yeah, I think it's California. And yeah, they are rival restaurants. They are owned by two families who are both from or originate from Vietnam, and they have children, so two teenagers in each family who have grown up knowing that they should hate each other, but they meet and they realise perhaps they don't hate each other after all, and perhaps it's something more like love. So it's kind of an enemies to lovers, forbidden romance trope, I would say. And overall I really loved it as a romance. What I liked in particular was how the book was so much more than their love story. So we see a lot about the two characters trying to navigate their careers and what they want to do in life, about finding their passions. So Lynn is an artist, and it's about her trying to connect with that passion while her parents don't really see it as a viable career, but her being determined to stick with it and her finding success with it as well. And then Beau is really into writing, or realises that he's really into writing, and again it's about him connecting with that passion and finding out about how to make that a career as well. So I really loved how much this book focused on that as well as the romance. It made it feel really realistic as a YA new adult love story, because that's what a lot of young people have to consider, and that is, you know, when you're that age, when you're 16, 17, 18, that is really what you're thinking about, as well as all of the other things that comes with being a teenager. So I really loved it for that. I also really loved how it explored the immigrant experience. There's a lot about the family's heritage in Vietnam, about their relationship with the country, about how they had to escape during the war, and I really liked the way it explored that theme. My only issue with this book really is that the conflict, the inevitable conflict that has to come in any romance, just came way too late in the book, to the point where I really wasn't invested anymore, and I would rather it had come earlier because I would have been more invested in them having made up. But because it was so late, honestly, it was probably the last 50 pages of the book, I already felt very satisfied with where we were with the characters, with how their relationship had progressed, the journey that everyone had been on, and so I just didn't really need this conflict anymore. But to be honest, that didn't really mar my experience of the book, and I did really love it, so I gave this one 4 stars and would really recommend it if you're looking for a romance. Moving on to more romance, we now have Act Your Age Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. Now, I have read the other two in this series, so Chloe Brown and Danny Brown, and I adored them. Talia Hibbert does romance incredibly, really inclusively, really realistically, and honestly I just really love this series. So this one is about Eve Brown, who is in a bit of a rut with her career, and one thing leads to another. She finds herself without a job, and while driving past a little village she stumbles across a B&B that is looking for a chef, and despite not being qualified for the job, she decides to go for the role, and meets the grumpy owner Jacob, and I think we can all see where this is going. So yeah, the book was really great, obviously for the romance part. If you don't know, Talia Hibbert writes quite spicy romance, so the sex scenes were great as well, and there's also good representation of autism. Jacob is autistic, and Eve thinks she might be as well, so it's about exploring that part of their identity, and yeah, I really loved that. Interestingly enough, the reason this isn't a 5-star book is the same as a fur love story, and that's because the conflict came way too late. I don't personally think romance needs conflict, but obviously when you write a romance and it's kind of a Cinderella storyline, which most romances are, you do need the conflict, and I understand why authors put the conflict in there. However, it just wasn't necessary to this book. It felt kind of forced. It kind of ruined some of the characters for me, and yeah, it just wasn't really necessary again, so that's why I can't give it 5 stars. But I did really love it, and again, if you're looking for a romance, I would really recommend not only Eve Brown but the whole Brown Sisters series, and I do want to read more from Talia Hibbert because I bet all of her romances are really good. And again, moving on to more romance is Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. So This was the book club pick for my book club. If you want to join my book club, the link is in the description. And apparently this is one of those TikTok sensations. The way my book club chooses the book is that everybody, there's like a Google form that everybody puts suggestions on. Every month I go through them, I pick out 6. Sometimes with the theme, so in February, because it's Valentine's Day, they were all romance books, and then I put a poll on the Facebook group and everybody votes. So it's kind of out of my control what we read to an extent. Obviously I choose the 6, I curate those 6, but it could be any one of those 6. I didn't really know much about this, but I did know that it was popular and a few people had submitted it, so that's why it was part of the poll, but I didn't really know what to expect. So this is a grumpy sunshine romance trope. It is about Naomi, who goes to this town to find her sister because she has just run away from something, I won't tell you. But when she gets there, she realises her sister has stolen all of her stuff, all of her money, and left her with her child, so Naomi's niece, to then look after. So there's that side of the story. Then immediately as she gets there, she meets Knox, who is the grumpy part of this grumpy sunshine trope, and the two instantly hate each other and are learning how to navigate this new situation where Naomi has an 11-year-old to look after. Knox doesn't know what to do with either of them, only having known Naomi's sister in the past and hating her. So it's what develops from that. Now, going back to Eve Brown to an extent, I wouldn't say it's the most grumpy sunshine I've ever seen, but it is very much grumpy sunshine as a trope. This is how you do grumpy sunshine. This is not how you do grumpy sunshine. Oh my god, this was so bad, and it's so long as well. It was 480 pages and it was awful. Badly written. The characters were so two-dimensional. There was nothing to them at all. Nothing made sense. There were so many, not plot holes, but they would think one thing and then do another thing. Their actions never matched their thought processes. Then moving on to the actual romance, the sex scenes came out of nowhere and kind of felt very icky. Given Naomi's past, which I won't go into because it's spoilers, but given Naomi's past, I just really hated the way that they interacted with each other during sex. I hate the way Knox was about the situations. Honestly, there were so many red flags and icks. It was awful. Most people in my book club also agreed. And in fact, the people that came to the book club thinking they liked this book left the book club thinking they didn't like it, because we all just discussed it and everybody came to the realisation that this is a terrible, terrible book. So I would not recommend this at all. It's not even one of those books where I'm like, oh, get it out of the library and see if you like it. No, it's terrible, it's trash, don't read it. I don't understand why this is a TikTok sensation. People either don't read things very deeply and can't kind of see beyond the romance element of it, or they just like toxic, problematic romance. This is a 1-star read for me, and that's all I'll say. Okay, 3 left. Up next we have The Salt Path by Raina Wynn. This is a non-fiction about the author who loses her home. Her and her husband lose her home because of a court case where they lose all their money, they lose their home, they lose everything, and as a result of that they decide to walk the Salt Path, which is, or it's the southwest coastal path, which runs from Wales all the way round Cornwall into Devon, and then I think it extends into Portsmouth. If you see a map of England, that the little shoe part of England that is Cornwall, it runs basically all of that. So it's a really long walk. Most people only do part of it. Very rarely do people do the whole thing, and especially all in one go. So yeah, this is basically a book about their experience during the walk, but also goes into how and why they ended up losing their home, the impact of that on them as a couple and them as a family as well, and also about Raina's husband, Moth, his illness, which is terminal, and how that motivates them to do this walk, but also the impact that that has on him physically, mentally, and on their relationship generally. On paper, I really wanted to love this book. I can completely understand why Raina felt a compulsion to write this book, absolutely. Overall though, it was just very forgettable, and I kind of feel really mean saying that because obviously it's a true story and I don't want to dismiss somebody's lived experience, But yeah, I don't think I could connect with her as a narrator, whether it's because she isn't like a trained writer and this was just a book she wrote after these experiences. Although having said that, it wasn't badly written. I thought it was very well written actually. But I couldn't really connect with her as a writer. I didn't really like the angle that some of the narration had. And like I said, yeah, overall, it was very forgettable and very unimpactful for me. I do know a lot of people who really like this book, and I'm sure that it is popular for a reason, but just for me personally, I didn't love it, so I gave it 3 stars. Penultimate book then is Every Leaf a Hallelujah, which I listened to on audio. I listened to this on Scribd. If you want 2 months free of Scribd, you can use my referral code in the description. I was just working on my craft project and I wanted something quick to listen to while I was doing that. This is only an hour long and I listened to it on 1.2, so I think it ended up being like 40 minutes, so it's really not long at all. So this is a children's / middle grade book about a 7-year-old girl who has to go into a forest to find a flower to save her mother and also the other people in her village who are dying from an illness. It's a really interesting book, especially given that the audience is children. It talks a lot about the environmental impact that we're having on the planet. It talks a lot about deforestation, about how we should be making changes to think more about our impact on the environment, and yeah, I really did love it. So like I said, this 7-year-old girl goes to find this flower and basically she begins a relationship with the trees in the forest. They speak to her and basically tell her their story and what the impact of deforestation is doing to them. And yeah, it was really great. Obviously it's a children's book, so don't expect to go into it thinking it has these really deep and complicated narrative elements, because it doesn't. It's a children's book, it's very simplistic, but I just really loved what it was trying to do, and because I listened to it on audio as well and it was narrated by the author, I think that had even more of an impact. So I would really recommend it. I love reading middle grade and children's books, so yeah, would really recommend that one. Okay, and finally I read Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. Now, I read The House on the Cerulean Sea, which I think is there, yep, 2 years ago, I believe, and I adored it. If there was any book that just epitomises a hug in a book, it is The House in the Cerulean Sea. And actually, having now read Under the Whispering Door, I think it's just TJ Klune's style generally. So Under the Whispering Door is about, I always forget the protagonist, Wallace, who within 5 pages of the book dies, and when he dies he then is met by a reaper who takes him to a house, this house on the front cover, which is a tea shop, and he meets, oh god, Hugo, who is the owner of the tea shop, and Hugo basically leads him into what will be the afterlife. So, a lot to unpack here. Obviously, firstly, it is a little bit fantasy based because it talks about not only the afterlife, which isn't really fantasy, but it does have elements to it that feel fantastical because of the way that they are. I won't go into details of that because it is spoilers. I really just loved Klune's depiction of the afterlife, and not only that, but the amount of thought that went into what would happen when you die. And it wasn't just a simple, you will meet a reaper, they will take you to the afterlife, job done. It was really complex, and I really loved that. I think the explorations of grief were beautiful, and I can imagine if you have felt grief in a really hard way, you will be able to connect with this book immensely. Not only that, but the romance element to it between Hugo and Wallace was stunning. The romance in The House in the Cerulean Sea is also beautiful, and I just really loved it. This would easily bring someone to tears. I'm not someone that cries at books, but if I was someone that cries at books, this is definitely one that would pull on my heartstrings and make me cry. Overall, yeah, I just really loved it. So I didn't give this one 5 stars, I gave it 4.5, and I think the only reason for that is because I gave The Cerulean Sea 5 and it wasn't quite there for me. It wasn't quite the same, and honestly there's not even anything I can like pinpoint as to why. It just didn't quite touch me like Cerulean Sea did, so I'm just knocking down half star, but it really was beautiful, and I would really recommend it. So that is all 8 of the books I read in February. Please let me know if you have read any of them and what you thought, whether you agree or disagree with me. I imagine March, because it's a bit of a longer month, I'll probably read a few more. So obviously I'll do a wrap up at the end of this month and keep you posted. Yeah, and so I hope you've enjoyed this. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok and you can keep up with what I'm reading at the moment. And yeah, if you like this video, please like it and please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time. Bye!